My name is Myra Spencer. I'm 36, and I've stitched up strangers at 3 in the morning without my hands ever shaking. A year after my divorce, I was finishing a shift near the maternity ward when my ex-mother-in-law spotted me by the elevators. Carol Bishop had a way of smiling that looked like a door closing. She walked right up, smug as Sunday, and said it loud enough for the nurses to hear. Leaving you was the best decision my son ever made. Now he has a baby boy, with your best friend. 6 years of being called the broken one, packed into a single breath. I didn't flinch. I just looked at her, calm as a flat line, and said, "Is that what you believe?" 5 minutes later, a man neither she nor my best friend expected walked through that door. And the one name nobody wanted written down was about to be read out loud in a courtroom. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where calm women face loud cruelty, and the truth takes its time, but never misses. If a quiet kind of justice is your thing, settle in. Drop a comment telling me where you're listening from, and be sure to subscribe. Let me back up 5 minutes, because the smile came before the man did. It was a Thursday, near the end of a 12-hour shift, and I was handing off a chart to a night nurse named Theo. The maternity wing sat one hallway over from the emergency department where I worked, and I'd cut through it 100 times without thinking. Carol was there visiting. Of course she was. Paige had delivered 3 weeks earlier, and the whole Bishop side of town had been parading through with balloons and casseroles. I knew that. I'd braced for it. What I hadn't braced for was Carol planting herself in my path like she'd been waiting all afternoon. She looked me up and down, taking in my scrubs and my tired eyes, and her chin lifted. That was when she said her piece about her son and his baby boy and my best friend. Theo went still beside me. A passing aide slowed her steps, and I felt my own thumb find the thin gold watch on my wrist, the one that had belonged to my grandmother, and press against its face the way I'd done since I was a girl, waiting out something I couldn't change yet. I didn't raise my voice. I'd learned a long time ago that the loudest person in a room is rarely the one holding the truth. "Is that what you believe?" I asked her again, softer this time. Carol blinked, thrown by the calm. She'd expected tears, or rage, or at least a flinch. She got none of it. And somewhere down that hallway, a set of automatic doors hissed open, though I didn't turn to look yet. I didn't know who was coming, but I knew what I'd already set in motion. Here's the thing you should know about me before the rest of it makes sense. I grew up in a farm town in southern Ohio, the kind of place where everybody's business is everybody's gospel. My mother cleaned houses. My father drove a feed truck until his back gave out. I worked 2 jobs through college and another 2 through medical school, and I learned to keep my head down and let my work speak. That was the whole of my philosophy for most of my life. Do good work quietly, and the truth will sort itself out. People will see who you really are. I believe that the way some people believe in luck, it made me good in a trauma bay, where you don't get to panic and you don't get to explain yourself. You just fix what's in front of you and move to the next. The smell of the place, that clean cotton and antiseptic smell that clings to everything in a hospital, used to settle me the second I walked in. It meant I was somewhere I was good. Somewhere nobody had ever once called me broken. I could run a code, set a shoulder, talk a frightened kid through stitches, all without my pulse climbing. But that same instinct, the one that made me steady under pressure, had a shadow side. I carried things alone. I didn't ask for help. And when people started telling a story about me that wasn't true, I did the worst possible thing a quiet woman can do. I trusted that staying quiet would be enough. The hospital was the one place left where nobody dared call me hollow. The rest of my life by then was a different story. I married Mark Bishop when I was 28. He was charming in a way that made strangers feel chosen. He remembered names. He shook hands like he meant it. Half the county would have vouched for him, and for the first few years, so would I. We wanted children. We tried for a long time, and nothing happened. And the not happening sat in our house like a third person at the table. After about 2 years, I did what any doctor would do. I suggested we both get tested. Simple blood work, a basic workup. The kind of thing I ordered for patients all the time. Mark refused. He laughed it off at first, then got sharp about it. He said bishop men didn't have those problems. He wrapped it in a little speech about faith, about how we should leave it in God's hands. I pushed once. I pushed twice. And then I let it go. Because you cannot drag a grown man into a clinic, and because I still believed silence was a kind of patience. I went and got tested by myself. My results came back completely normal. I remember sitting in my car in the clinic lot, reading the paper, relieved and confused at the same time. If it wasn't me, then what was it? I didn't have an answer. I couldn't force one. And the longer I went without one, the easier it became for the people around me to write their own. By then, Mark had already started saying things, quiet things, to his mother first. That maybe the problem was me. That maybe I just couldn't. I didn't know yet how far a quiet lie can travel when the right person decides to carry it. Carol Bishop ran the women's circle at her church the way a general runs a campaign. She'd buried her husband young and raised Mark alone, and somewhere in those hard years she'd decided her son was proof she hadn't failed. He was perfect, because he had to be. If he wasn't, then what had all that sacrifice bought her? So when Mark whispered that the trouble was probably me, Carol didn't question it for a second. She picked it up, and she ran. It started small. A sympathetic sigh at a potluck. A hand on someone's arm. A lowered voice. Poor Mark. He wanted children so badly. Then it grew teeth. At a church supper that fall, she introduced me to a visiting pastor's wife with a look of practiced pity. "This is Myra," she said. "My daughter-in-law. She's a doctor, you know. Such a shame about the children." The woman gave me a sad, knowing nod, and I understood that whatever story had been told about me, it had already arrived ahead of me. I stood there in my good dress holding a paper plate, and Carol patted my hand like I was the one who needed comforting. Then she said the thing she'd go on saying for years, the thing she said the way other people say grace. Some women just aren't built for it. She smiled when she said it. She believed it. That was the worst part. She wasn't being cruel on purpose. She was repeating what her son had handed her, polished and certain, and she had no idea the words were a lie wearing her own voice. I drove home that night and didn't say anything to Mark. I should have, but I was still waiting for the truth to sort itself out. Paige Dolan had been my best friend since we were 15. We met in a high school chemistry class and stayed close through everything that came after. My move away for school, her string of jobs that never quite stuck, 2 states and a dozen years. She was the one I called when my father died. She stood up at my wedding in a green dress and cried during my vows. So when the church talk started getting to me, Paige was who I leaned on. She'd come over with wine and let me vent, and she always knew the right thing to say. Or so I thought. Looking back, every comfort she offered had a hook in it. "You're so accomplished, Myra. Maybe that's just not your path. Mark adores you. Don't let his mother get in your head. You don't need a baby to be whole." Kind words, all of them, but they always landed on the same bruise. They always reminded me of the thing I supposedly lacked. I didn't notice then how often her eyes drifted to Mark across a room, or how she'd started knowing things about his schedule that I hadn't told her. I was too busy being grateful to have one person who didn't seem to be judging me. She'd sit on my couch in my own living room and tell me I deserved better, and I'd nod, never once thinking she meant she deserved my life. People like Paige don't take what's yours all at once. They borrow it, piece by piece, until one day you look up and it's gone, and they're standing in it like they were always meant to. I trusted her completely. That was the second mistake I didn't know I was making. Mark filed for divorce on a Tuesday. I came home from a shift to find a manila envelope on the kitchen counter and his closet half empty. He didn't even wait to tell me himself. By the weekend, he'd moved into Paige's apartment across town, and the story had already been written for me. The version going around was tidy and cruel. Myra was cold. Myra was married to her job. Myra couldn't give him children, and a man wants a family, doesn't he? Carol made sure every pew heard it. Paige, my page, said nothing to correct it. The two people who'd known me longest let me become a cautionary tale, and I didn't fight it. Because fighting felt like proving them right. I didn't post a word online. I didn't call a single person to defend myself. I went to work the next morning and set a teenager's broken arm and told him he'd be fine, and he was. And that felt like the only true thing I did all week. If you've ever swallowed a lie about yourself just to keep the peace, to keep a family, a friendship, a reputation you'd spent years building, then you know exactly what that tastes like. It tastes like blood you're not allowed to spit out. Stay with me here, because this is where I started to understand something. The peace I was keeping so carefully wasn't even mine to keep. It belonged to the people lying about me. They were the ones who needed me quiet. Comment truth, if you've ever been there, and keep watching, because the silence didn't last. I want to tell you about the day a hospital board taught me that some things are worth getting loud about. The story stopped being about my marriage the day it walked into my hospital. I'd been in line for years to lead the emergency department. I'd built the trauma protocols half the county now ran on. The job was as good as mine, and everyone knew it. Then the whispers found the credentialing committee. Not the truth. There was no truth to find. Just the shape of it. Dr. Spencer's personal life is unstable. There are questions about her judgment. Did you hear about the divorce? About what her husband's family says? One board member, a man who golfed with Mark's uncle, started asking pointed questions about my fitness to lead under stress, as if I hadn't spent a decade staying calm while people bled out on my table. When the position was announced, it went to someone with half my hours and none of my protocols. They told me I was a strong candidate. They told me it was a difficult decision. They did not tell me the real reason, but I'd grown up in a small town. I knew the sound of a verdict dressed up as a compliment. That was the night something shifted in me. A lie about my body had cost me my marriage, and I'd let it, because I thought enduring it was the decent thing to do. But now the same lie was reaching into the one place I'd never let anyone touch: my work, my name, the thing I'd bled for. I sat in my car in the hospital lot, the same way I'd sat years before reading my normal test results, and I realized the silence I'd been so proud of had a price tag, and someone else had been quietly running up the bill. A nurse I trusted gave me the name of a lawyer named Ruth Calloway. Ruth's office was above a hardware store, and she had reading glasses pushed up into gray hair and a way of looking at you like she was already 3 moves ahead. I told her everything: the marriage, the church talk, the board, the job I'd lost. She listened without interrupting, which lawyers rarely do, and when I finished, she set down her pen. "What you're describing might be defamation," she said. "Maybe false light. But I won't lie to you. It's hard." She laid it out plainly. To win, we'd have to prove 3 things: that a specific false statement had been made, that it had been spread to other people, and that it had caused me real, measurable harm. "The harm part you've got," she said. "A lost promotion is a number. A salary is a number. That's the easy part." I sat there turning my grandmother's watch around my wrist. "And the false part?" Ruth looked at me over her glasses. "That's the part you have to be willing to fight about in public. They'll say the statement is true. They'll say you really couldn't have children. To win, you'd have to be ready to prove it wasn't you." I felt my stomach drop, because of course I couldn't prove that. My results were normal, but a normal result doesn't say whose fault the silence was. It only says it wasn't mine. I almost stood up and left. The whole thing felt like inviting the town to dissect me. Then Ruth said the thing I needed to hear. "Silence isn't a virtue, Myra, when it's costing you your career. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself is make them prove what they're saying." I didn't answer right away, but I didn't leave either. I spent 2 weeks weighing it. I'm not impulsive. I make decisions the way I read a chart. Slowly, then all at once. I wrote down everything I stood to lose. The church community that had watched me grow up. My standing in a town that already half believed the worst. The way people would talk, calling me bitter, calling me cold, saying I was the kind of woman who sues her ex-husband's family out of spite. I knew exactly how that story would go, because they'd already written most of it. But then I wrote down the other column. My name, my work, the truth, and the simple fact that I had done nothing wrong and was being punished for it anyway. I kept coming back to one thing. I wasn't doing this to hurt Mark. If I'd wanted to hurt him, I'd had a year of chances. I was doing this so that a hospital board would stop believing a story that wasn't true, so that the next time my name came up in a room I wasn't in, it came up clean. That was the line I drew, and I drew it on purpose. This wouldn't be revenge. Revenge is loud and hungry and never satisfied. This would be the truth, said once, in a place where it counted, by someone who'd finally decided she was done carrying a lie that belonged to other people. I called Ruth on a Monday morning before my shift. I told her I was in. Good, she said. Then let's make them say it under oath. I hung up and walked into the trauma bay and had the steadiest day I'd had in a year. Turns out a made-up mind is its own kind of calm. Ruth drafted the complaint over the next few weeks. It named the specific statements, the dates, the witnesses who'd heard them. It laid out the lost promotion, the salary difference, the documented harm to my professional reputation. Reading it was strange. My whole quiet humiliation, organized and numbered and turned into something with weight. When it was filed, the news moved through town faster than any ambulance I'd ever ridden. Myra Spencer is suing the bishops. Carol was incandescent. She told the women's circle I'd become vengeful and godless, that grief over my empty house had turned me cruel. She doubled down on every word she'd ever said, which, though she didn't know it, was exactly what Ruth had hoped she'd do. Mark stayed quiet at first. Paige did too. But I started getting messages. Some cruel, some curious, a few quietly supportive from women who'd had their own reputations rewritten by people who claimed to love them. One read, "Good for you." They did the same to my sister. I didn't respond to any of them. I just kept showing up to work and let the case move at the speed of the law, which is to say, slowly. Ruth told me the next step was the other side's response. How Mark's lawyer chose to defend the statements would shape everything. They've got two roads, she said. They can say the comments were just opinion, hurt feelings, nothing actionable. That road's annoying but survivable for them. She tapped her pen on the desk. Or they can plant their flag and say the statements were true. That you really were the reason. That road is the one I'm praying they take. I asked her why. She smiled like a woman who already knew the answer. Because then they have to prove it. And to prove it, they have to open a door. They took the second road. Of course they did. Mark's lawyer filed a response that planted the flag exactly where Ruth had hoped. Their defense, in plain English, was that the statements about me weren't defamation at all, because they were true. I really had been the reason the marriage produced no children. The fault, they argued on paper, was medical, and it was mine. When Ruth called to tell me, I could hear something close to delight under her steady voice. They just said the magic words, she told me. Truth is a defense. But here's what they didn't think through. She let it sit a beat. To prove the statement is true, to prove you were the infertile one, they'd have to put both of your medical pictures in front of a court. Now, I won't oversell it. Reproductive records are about as private as records get, and no judge hands them over lightly. We'd still have to convince the court it's relevant and narrow. But they just argued, under oath, that the cause was definitely you. They can't make that claim and then refuse to let anyone look at him. That's the crack. It's not a door swinging open. It's a crack. I can work with a crack. I sat down slowly at my kitchen table. Meaning? Meaning, Ruth said. They just put Mark's own fertility in play. He spent years hiding behind it was her. By swearing to it in court, he may have handed us the reason to finally ask about him. No promises. But it's the best opening we've had. For 6 years, I'd been the one whose body was up for discussion at potlucks and prayer circles, and in trying to make that official, in trying to win by saying it loud in court, the bishops had done the one thing none of them had ever been willing to do. They'd opened the door to looking at Mark. I thought about him refusing the tests all those years ago. The sharp, little speeches. The way the subject had always slammed shut whenever it turned toward him. I didn't say anything to Ruth yet. But a thread I'd buried a long time ago had just twitched, and I felt it move. That night, I couldn't sleep. So I did what I always do when something won't sit right. I went back through the timeline in my head, slow and careful, like reading an old chart for the thing you missed the first time. And there it was, 7 years back. A morning early in the marriage when Mark had driven up to the city alone for what he called a routine physical. He'd been gone all day. He came home different, quiet in a way that wasn't like him, short with me over nothing, and he'd poured himself a drink before dinner, which he never did on a weekday. I'd asked if everything was okay. He'd said the doctor was a quack, and the whole trip was a waste, and he changed the subject so hard it left a mark. And here was the part that kept me staring at the ceiling. After that day, he never mentioned getting tested again. Not once. Before the city, he'd at least pretended to take the question seriously. After it, the subject was simply closed, and somewhere in that same stretch of weeks, the first whispers about me began. I'd filed it away at the time as a man being moody about a wasted afternoon. I hadn't connected it to anything, because I hadn't been looking for a lie. You don't audit the people you love. But now, with Ruth's words still in my ears, that quiet day in the city looked less like a wasted trip and more like the moment something got decided. I didn't have proof. I want to be clear about that. I had a memory and a bad feeling, which is nothing in a courtroom. But it was enough to tell Ruth where to point. And the next morning, that's exactly what I did. Ruth listened to my story about the trip to the city without writing anything down, which I'd learned meant she was paying close attention. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. On its own, that's nothing, she said. A memory of a bad mood. But it's a reason to ask the right question. She explained what came next. Because the other side had put my fertility at issue, and because they'd argued the cause was definitely me and not him, Ruth could ask the court to compel the production of Mark's own relevant medical records. If he wants to claim it was you, she said, the law lets me ask to see whether it was him. That's how this works. You can't open a door halfway. She filed the motion the following week. Mark's lawyer fought it hard, and I understood then that I'd touched something real, because nobody fights that hard over nothing. They argued privacy. They argued relevance. They argued anything that might keep that one folder closed. The hearing got scheduled, and I had to sit with the not knowing, which for a person like me is its own special torture. I'm used to ordering a test and getting an answer. This was different. This was asking a judge for permission to even look. I went back to my shifts and set bones and read scans and tried not to think about a folder I'd never seen, sitting in some city clinic's archive that might say everything or might say nothing. Ruth told me to be patient. Courts move slow on purpose, she said. It gives the truth time to stop being scary. I wasn't scared of the truth. I'd never been scared of the truth. I was scared they'd find a way to keep me from it. Before the judge would rule on the motion, Ruth needed me to sign a verified complaint, a sworn version of everything, each statement, each date, each witness, attested to under penalty of perjury. She set it on the desk between us, a thick stack with little colored tabs marking every place my name went. Read all of it, she said, then sign only what you know is true. So I read it. Every line. The potluck. The pastor's wife. The exact words Carol said at the church supper. The ones about how some women just aren't built for it. The board meeting. The salary I lost. Reading my own quiet years laid out in numbered paragraphs did something to me. It made the lie look as flimsy as it actually was. I picked up the pen Ruth handed me, and I noticed the smell of the room. Not the clean antiseptic of my hospital, my old hiding place, but paper and ink, and dust from the hardware store below. For years, that hospital smell had meant safety,